G'day viewers, hope you all had a cushy Christmas. This is a follow-up video from one I did a couple of weeks ago about tools I use in the workshop and would recommend as presents. I'm going to show you how to use all of them, just briefly. There's so many tips in here that you want to just watch it all the way through so you can pick up on them all, whether you've used the tools before or not. And then I'm going to show you one at the end, which will determine whether your bike can be written off or not if you don't use that tool properly. In my experience, most professional mechanics in workshops don't even adhere to this rule. Invariably, it ends in tears. If you didn't catch my video before Christmas about recommended tools, I'll leave a link for it in the description below. The first one up is a Roloff chain checker. I recommended that you buy a chain checker so that you can check a chain and change it before you start wearing your cogs at the front and the rear out. This will just save you loads of money. Just put it in the biggest cog at the front and one of the biggest ones at the rear, because this will put the chain in its maximum tightness, and so it'll pull the links apart where it's actually wearing away. And it has two measurements on it. Now, if you put the 0.1 in and it goes all the way in, the chain's had it, and it's highly likely that your cassette's probably had it as well, and maybe even the chain rings. But if that doesn't go in, you can turn it over to the smaller measurement, which is 0.75. If that goes in, it's probably about time to change your chain, and you'll get away with not changing your cogs on the rear or the chain wheels on the front. You can see from this worn out chain, which is really worn out, that when I put the bigger measurement, the 0.10, down into the chain, it just drops straight in. That's got to go in the bin, along with the cassette. Fortunately, the chain rings are still all right. Next, we have the master link splitter, or chain joining link tool from Park. Now, this is basically so that you can undo your chain where you've got a master link in it. And the easiest way to do that is to basically put it in the two smallest cogs and then just pedal it backwards until the master link comes down through the bottom derailleur and is somewhere between the jockey cage and the front chain rings. All you have to do is put the two prongs on the end of it up between the outside of the master link, the joining link, and then just squeeze it, and basically it'll just push the link apart. And then sometimes you just have to give it a little wiggle so that it breaks away. There are some tools out there that will rejoin that link as well, but there's quite an easy way to do it. So if you just backpedal the chain, so you end up with the master link on the top run, so basically between the front chain ring at the top and the rear cogs, and then you just hold the back wheel and then just press down on the crank, it'll just pop it in place. Don't try and do it down the bottom, because if you slip while you're trying to pull the chain, you will probably whack your hands on the chain rings, and that could be quite painful. The next one up is the chain brute from Park. Now, this is for splitting chains. It'll split pretty much any chain except for 1/8 chain, which is run on a single speed, and some Campagnolo chains. The way to use this tool is to lay the chain in it, so the open part of the link goes in the last part sticking up, that's protruding off the actual tool. If you put it further in, closer to the handle, what'll end up happening is that when you start to try and push the pin out, it'll snap that part. Once you've got the chain in place and you're just holding it there with your finger or your thumb, you just want to start winding the handle in, and that'll start to push up against the pin. You just make sure it's aligned before you actually go too far, and then you just want to start screwing it in, and that'll slowly push the pin through, and you'll feel it get a little bit easier as you're going through, and you want to just keep going until you get to the point where it just starts to tighten up again, and then you can just pop the chain out of the outer link. The other handy thing about this little tool is that when you actually want to unwind it, you can be holding onto something else and just do that with it. As far as chain lengths go, the way I set my chains up is I put it in the two smallest cogs, and then I have the chain as long as I can so it doesn't brush on the bottom of the derailleur cage. Now, this gives you a few more links to go round than if you did it a bit shorter, or you did it at the kind of tightest it could be on the big, and that'll just make your chain last longer, and therefore to make your cogs and your chain rings last longer. Next up is a cassette lock ring tool. Now, this is used to do up or undo the lock ring of a cassette. It does what it says on the tin. If you need to get your cassette off, you'll need to use it with a sprocket whip. So I'm going to show you how to use both at the same time. Now, the way we do it in the workshop was we pretty much had the lock ring tool living in one of our vices. And so we just go get the wheel, and we just put the wheel face down onto the lock ring tool, make sure it's seated, and then I get the sprocket whip, and I wrap it around maybe like the third or fourth cog up, do it on one of the bigger ones, and then you just push it away from yourself, and that'll basically try and turn the wheel and hold the lock ring in place, which basically undoes it. Now, if you don't have a vise, you can do it with an adjustable spanner. The way to do that is just to put the sprocket whip around the cassette, again, in maybe the third or fourth cog from the top, and then get in a position where it's facing away from you so that you're going to push away from yourself when you do this. And I usually sit down and do this, so it just makes it a bit safer. And you get your adjustable spanner or your other sprocket whip, which has a tool on the end of it to undo the lock ring tool, and you just ease them away from each other. Don't try and do it really hard to start with, because it might just give with quite a jolt, especially if someone hasn't done it up tight enough in the first place. Another thing that you can do, if you're a little bit worried about the lock ring tool coming out, or sometimes they don't just seat in there very far, is you can take your skewer and you can put that all the way through and just tighten the end of the skewer onto the actual skewer itself, and that will just hold it in place. But as you undo it, it'll butt up against it, so you will have to undo it to completely remove it. If you're fitting the cassette back to the bike, you basically just want to get the cassette on and then start to screw the actual lock ring in, and then just get the tool in the back of it and just screw it down with your hand, and then either put it in the vise and tighten it up by pulling the wheel around it, or get an adjustable spanner or the back end of the chain whip and just put that on the tool and then just tighten it up. Next up, we've got the park tyre levers. These come in a pack of 3. You usually only need 2, but sometimes you do need 3. Now the easiest way to get a tyre off is to let all the air out of it and then break the bead so the tyre bead's broken away from the rim. And then basically you want to get on the dish side of the wheel. Now taking the tyre off from the dish side, whether it be a front wheel or a rear wheel, is the easiest side to get it on and off of. So basically you want to just put the tyre lever underneath it, near where there's an outboard spoke, get the other tyre lever and put it underneath it, not too far away, and then just lever them both off at the same time, and hook the tyre lever that's near the outboard spoke, round the outboard spoke, take your other tyre lever out, and then take a little bit more of the tyre off the other side. And you'll just find from that point, once you've done that, the rest of the tyre will come off fairly easily. Next up, we have 2 tools. They're both the same, they're just for different bolts. So I'm only just going to show you how to use one of them. It's the Park Folding Multiple Allen Key Pack, or Hexagon Key Pack, whatever you want to call it. So this also applies to the Park Multi-Folding Torx tool. It's exactly the same as the Allen Key set, except it's just Torx fittings. Now this can be used for a variety of bolts on bikes. I usually use it to do things like the handlebar stem up and there's seat bolts and fit calipers to bikes. What I don't really use it for is doing up things like brake pads, because I just find that other tools are better for that. Something like a T-bar Allen key. So they're very good for tightening things up or getting things loose. And they're especially good if you're trying to do an area, say around the handlebars or the stem, where you've got different size Allen keys. Because you can just hold onto the bike and change the size Allen key you want without having to put it down and get another Allen key out of another pack. I think they're a great tool as well, because you can just carry it around in your back pocket. And if you adjust these bolts here to the tightness that suits you, you can set them up so that you can just flick them open like that. And then you can just choose the one you want. You don't have to dig around and just try and get it out. Next up, we have the Cool Stop tyre jack. And this is basically if you're having trouble getting your tyres on right at the end, you can actually use this just to put the one side of it, the handle side, and sit it on the actual edge of the rim, and then it'll reach across with the arm and hook the tyre, and you can just slowly pull that on and follow it with your hand behind until you get that last bit on. It'll save you trying to do it with tyre levers, because you don't want to do that, because half the time they'll puncture. And if you just can't get it on, because sometimes we can't, some tyre combinations and rim combinations are just too tight to get on with your hands. This is a great tool. Next, we've got the Dualco mini grease gun. Now these are wonderful tools to have, because basically if you've got grease on your bench, you're bound to get some sort of grit in there at some point, and that's no good for bearings, like wheel bearings and headset bearings. This is a good way to keep your grease clean, but also be able to get into places like inside a wheel, when you just want to squirt in a little bit of grease, get some bearings in there, and you don't just want grease all over the place. Now there's a good trick that we use to filling it right up. Start off with, we have a special tin that's always sealed, so the grease is always clean when we put it in. And what you want to do is spoon it in with the plunger fully extended out. And if you put it in the vise, you can put it a little bit further as well. And then once you've scooped it in there, you can just get an old spoke, obviously a clean old spoke, and just put it in the grease and spin it around. And what that'll do is it'll take all the grease in a little kind of whirlpool down towards the bottom of the gun. And then you'll be able to load it up with some more again. This really does reduce the amount of times you have to refill the gun. Next up are the Park cable cutters. Now these are for cutting inner cables and outer cables. Not only can these be used to cut the cables, but with the outer cables for the gears, you can use them to reshape it so you get a nice round hole to get the caps back on. And the other thing they can be used for is when you cut the coiled cable for the brake, often what happens is part of the cable just coils over on the inside, and that's just going to drag on the cable and actually just be in the way. So if you just angle the cutters a little bit, you can just snip that straight off like an ingrown toenail. Next up, we've got the Park chain cleaner. Now this works very similarly to most chain cleaners. You basically got brushes and little cogs in there and sponges, and this particular one has like a magnet in the bottom of it, so if there's any metal filings off the chain, they just get sucked down to the bottom. What you want to do is just clip it onto the chain and then just try and fill it up from the top with whatever cleaner you're going to use. We use GD85 here, but don't just fill it up to the line, because the problem with chain cleaners is if you're running the chain deep through the actual solvents, it'll just wash the grease out from in between the rollers, and that's something you really want to try and avoid if you can. So what we do is we just square a little bit in, we run the chain back a little bit, and we just keep topping it up until the chain just starts to get wet on the outside, and then we just run it around there, I don't know, a dozen times. And then when you're done with that, you want to take the tool off, dispose of the solvent sensibly and responsibly. And then just get a dry rag, a nice clean dry rag, fold it up and drag the chain through that, both horizontally and vertically. Now, if you're lucky enough to get a work stand for Christmas, or you've already got one, you'll probably know that it's going to make your life much easier when maintaining your bike. The really expensive ones, you can move the bike up and down so you can get it to different heights to make it easy to work on. You can also spin the bike around so you can get underneath it if you need to. But the one mistake that most people make, and this includes a lot of mechanics in workshops, is they clamp the frame with the work stand. Now this can very, very quickly turn into a written off frame, because a good work stand that clamps it tight enough so it doesn't move around while you're working it is strong enough to smash the carbon, smash the aluminium, or even damage a steel frame. Always put the seat post up further if it doesn't just fit into the stand, and just mark it with a bit of tape so that you can work out where it goes when you put it back down, and clamp it by the seat post. And beware, even with a carbon seat post, it will still crush it if you tighten it up too much. Now the list of things you can use GT85 on is pretty much endless. It'll clean just about anything except glass, carpet and wood. Now we use GT85 for quite a bit of stuff in the workshop. We use it to clean chains, we use it to lubricate chains, we use it to clean bikes down and other components. We also use it to oil things that you don't want heavy oils on, like jockey wheels. It really is good for just about everything on a bike. The reason GT85 is really good for cleaning stuff on bikes is because it just wipes the dirt straight off and it leaves a coat of PTFE on it, which basically protects it from the elements, but also it just doesn't pick up too much dirt. And the next time you come to clean your bike, it's much, much easier to do. GT85 is also pretty good for unseizing things. So if you've got pedals that are seized in, bottom bracket shells, you want to just get a bit of that in there, let it soak in and penetrate through, and it'll make it much easier to get it out, especially if they're bolts or something and you don't want to snap them by trying to remove them. As always, if you feel like you're getting benefit from this video, hit the like button down the bottom and share it with your friends or anyone you think will benefit from it. I hope everyone out there watching has a wonderful 2023.